OHRPP's Learn at Lunch. We're going to talk about document management and, of course, some other tips that have come my way from staff in OHRPP as well as from researchers, things that have gotten people a little stuck in their process. So I wanted to make sure that we made a bit of a catch-all. And I imagine that we'll do something similar. We'll do another round of these a little later on once Bruin IRB is a little more settled, just to make it clear how you can succeed in your submissions. So let me just, all right. Oh, here we go. I'm already up and running. So let's start with this. So as I said, the tips are compiled from our Bruin IRB team, which is Tanya Edwison. She's doing a great job. She's the person you want to talk to if Bruin IRB is not doing something it's supposed to do. Like say you're following a quick guide and the quick guide is not what you're seeing on your screen. She's also here to answer questions about how to use functions in Bruin IRB, and of course any problems. She's the person to talk to as our first round of there you go, there's Tanya. As our first round of sort of tech support, and she'll coordinate other tech support that might need to happen to solve your issue. Also, we've had a number of OHRPP staff who have provided me with some great tips. And we also are going to provide some best practices. And these best practices will help you have concise submissions. So just the facts, please. Just what you need. Just what the IRB needs. And that allows us to have a very smooth IRB review. And it also makes it easier if someone in the future takes over as a coordinator to figure out what's going on with this study or what happened for this amendment or et cetera. So with that in mind, let's get to the very first tip. There we go. Tip number 1 is submit only the documents that the IRB needs. So sometimes when you have, especially like a pharmaceutical industry study, they will tell you to submit everything and the kitchen sink to the IRB. And usually they'll say in like really small letters, like, if required by the IRB. So you don't have to follow their like bold-faced instructions of submitting everything to us. Just send us the things that the IRB needs to make their regulatory determinations. So the reason that this is so important for a speedy and easy review process is that when there's too many documents in an application that are not part of the IRB's process, it's hard for them to find the documents that are part of the process. So if you upload 20 documents and only one of them is necessary for the IRB to review, it gets harder to make sure that they actually get to the right document. So we have a guidance document, which is called Materials Required for IRB Review and Approval. And these will be in the slides that will be sent out to all registered attendees. So anyway, the hot link to that is there. We recommend strongly that you look at that guidance to see what it is that the IRB needs and what the IRB doesn't need. So as I mentioned before, it's a different set of documents that the IRB needs to do our job than say the FDA needs or the sponsor needs. So you really want to be specific to the stakeholder that you're working with in terms of what you provide. Does anyone have any questions about tip number 1? Anyone, this is the first time you're hearing about the materials required for IRB review and approval guidance? Okay, well, hopefully you'll take a look at that if this is your first time hearing about that guidance. And we'll move on to tip number 2. So, similar to tip number 1, keeping study documents organized is so important, again, for the IRB to find what they need to look at to make their regulatory determinations. So there are different things that go in different places in the Bruin IRB application. So the basic study information, item 8, is where you put clean and tracked versions of the protocol. This is after initial submission. At initial submission, you just put a clean version of the protocol. You also can put things like protocol clarification letters. So sometimes the sponsor will give you a protocol clarification letter, which is sort of like an addendum to the protocol, but it's not worth making a whole new protocol version, in their eyes at least. And then if there is, again, if you're submitting an amendment, a new version of the protocol, there should be from the sponsor something called a protocol summary of changes. Now, sometimes this is integrated into the revised protocol, like the top section of the revised protocol will be a summary of changes. Sometimes it'll be a separate document. So if it's a separate document, please also upload that one. And to the drug section, under each applicable drug, we would love to see the clean and track changes, versions of investigator's brochure, an IB summary of changes. Just like with the protocol summary of changes, sometimes the IB summary of changes is located inside the new IB, and sometimes it's a separate document. If it's a separate document, we'd love to see that uploaded to under that particular drug in the drug section, item 1. If that section doesn't allow you to upload more than one document, which would be an IB, a clean IB, then there are other places for you to upload, which is in item 4 of the drug section. So make sure that under each applicable drug, you have the clean version of the IB and an amendment where you're changing the IB, you'd have a clean and track changes version and a summary of changes. All right, and then to local site documents, that's where you submit clean and tracked consent forms, recruitment materials, and other required documents such as things like letters from CERC if there's a conflict of interest in the research team. There might be ancillary reviews that you would need to upload, documentation that your study had received approval from this particular ancillary review committee or the other one. So that's what you put to local site documents. All right, any questions about tip number 2? And the beauty of Bruin IRB is that it's a much smaller application, so there are fewer places where you could upload things incorrectly. So this is great. There aren't that many places to upload things, and the things that are there for you to upload should be pretty clear and straightforward, but we're happy to take feedback if there's something that is confusing about the upload process or the organization of documents in Bruin IRB.
More, can I ask a quick question?
Oh, and the abs. Hamida, did you have a question?
Yeah, real quick. When you say clean and tracked, I just want to make sure that I do it right. Clean and tracked. So clean for me.
Oh, let's see. What's media in the chat?
So can you hear me okay?
Okay, are PDFs needed to upload or are Word documents okay? Great questions. We would love to get a Word document, and those are easier for you to make like track changes versions of. When we stamp your consents at the end of a review process, we stamp them into PDF form, but they don't need to come in PDF form. So, you know, if you get a PDF from the sponsor that is track changes of the protocol, for instance, you're welcome to upload that. But generally speaking, most people upload Word documents. Let's see, tip number 1.
I'm sorry, did you hear my question?
What is an example of something not needed to submit that sponsor's request, but you don't need? Oh, great question. So there are, in the materials required for IRB review, we talk about homegrown surveys as something the IRB would want to see. If there is a standardized survey, maybe the sponsor is doing like a well-known suicide assessment. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but if it's a standardized, validated instrument, the IRB doesn't need to see it because they already are aware of its contents. So that's an example of things that the IRB doesn't need to see. The IRB also doesn't need to see things like the card that you give to participants that tell that they can hand to doctors saying that they're on a drug study. Like, we don't need to see those cards. You know, like that's absolutely not part of like the IRB's risk benefit assessment or regulatory determination. So it's a couple examples of things the IRB doesn't need to see. Oh, I can't hear people. I wonder why I can't hear people. Thank you for letting me know. And yeah, Tiffany was suggesting that regardless of whether I can hear you, which is unfortunate, it would be helpful to put your questions in chat so we can collect the chat history as in terms of our FAQs moving forward and making sure that we we answer everyone's questions. So I'm going to take a brief time out to see if I can fix my audio, and I'll be right back. Anya, can you ask me a question to see if I can hear it?
How are you today?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anya. All right, so now I can hear your questions. Is there anything else anyone wants to ask verbally or that they haven't asked in the chat about the things we covered so far? Nope. All right, let's move on to tip number 3. So, oh, here we go. Do you recommend we delete older versions? This is what I'm getting to, actually. There are a couple ways to deal with this, but one of them is to delete. Each time you have an amendment, you can delete the old things and put in the new things. That's one way to do it. Another way is this stacking mechanism, and we're putting together a quick guide to show you both ways to manage your documents. But you're absolutely welcome to delete and add amendment. So what we want to do is we want to reduce the clutter. Again, this is making it easier for the IRB to see the things the IRB needs to see. Reducing clutter, making it clear the current documents by removing the old documents makes it more likely that the correct consent forms, for example, will get stamped when the amendment is approved. It's really important that also you not use Burn IRB as your repository for all your study documents. We are shifting away from Web IRB, and people were very concerned that they wouldn't be able to access their documents. But the best practice is for you at each amendment or initial review to print out the approval memo, the new consent forms, and whatever else is particularly salient for that particular amendment, and put it in your regulatory binder or some other research file. You really need to keep track of those documents, and if you do it in an organized fashion and have like a binder of them, so you'll always know what the blank version of the stamped consent was at that period of time, then it'll really help you to have a better idea of what's going on in your study. If my team does post-approval monitoring, we might point out that this is like the wrong version used at that time, and so then you can like look through your files and say, oh yeah, I wonder why that happened, and you can look through and know as well as we do that like this wasn't the approved thing at that time. Let's see. So it includes consents. And you want to make sure that you don't maintain old versions. So one example of that is if you have a translated consent form into, let's say, Spanish as an easy case. Version 1 of the consent was in English, and then you got it translated into Spanish. And then you submitted version 2 of the consent form in English. Therefore, version 1 in Spanish is out of date, and we don't want to see that anymore. So whether you hide it or whether you delete it, we definitely need that to not be in the approved application so that you don't accidentally use the out-of-date Spanish version. This is for both of our good, is to make sure that everyone on the study team uses the correct current version, and that the IRB is able to review, approve, and stamp the correct version. Any question about tip number 3? Okay. Let's see. Oh, yeah, here we go. Florence eBinder is available for maintenance of electronic study documentation. Awesome. Yeah, so that's part of ResearchGo. Daniela, thank you for the link. Let's see, should we save clean tracked versions of protocol and IB along with summary changes in local documents section? So Vic, this sounds like it's the same question that you had before about should you delete older versions, or there are, as I mentioned, there are 2 ways to manage making sure that you only have visible the current version in your application. and one is to delete the old version and add a new version. Or you can stack them using the replace function. And again, we'll have a quick guide about that coming out soon. But either way is fine. But definitely follow Daniela's link to the eBinder scheme, and you can collect your documentation, collect your history of IRB reviews in that form, but not in Bruin IRB. All right, let's see. You're welcome. All right, so moving on to tip number 4. Understanding the difference between PI assurance and annual PI assurance. So this is a little bit outside of the realm of document management, but it is a problem that we've noticed come up quite a bit since our transition to Bruin IRB. And both the PI assurance and the annual PI assurance are both located in just the main study workspace. Now, the PI assurance is for every single study. At initial submission, the PI has to say, I'm going to be responsible for this study in all these different ways. And they're enumerated in the function. Only the PI can actually take the PI can make the PI assurance. So only the PI will have the button to provide a PI assurance. So the PI proxy won't have it, study coordinator, no one else in the team will have it. So you might have to work with your PI when a PI assurance is needed. The PI assurance is either at initial submission or when there's a change in PI. And basically, as I said before, it's saying I'm taking on the responsibility of this human subjects research protocol and making sure that people are protected and that things are submitted in a timely fashion, that my staff are trained appropriately, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the annual PI assurance is something we do for expedited studies that don't require continuing review. And what that does is say, I'm still responsible for the study and I am still continuing the study. This is to help us know which studies are active, even though we are not conducting continuing reviews for them. So just like with PI assurance, the annual PI assurance is only available in the main study workspace and only visible to the PI, the current PI. So hopefully that makes it clear. We're working on possible ways to make this easier for you guys to distinguish, easier for PIs to distinguish. But if you have any question, then let me know about tip number 4. All right, so Christine has a question. I just processed a submission yesterday and I didn't delete the previous Spanish translated versions. Why don't you just send a message to the OHRPP staff person assigned to your submission and ask them to return it to you, and then you can take it out and then send it back to them. It's real easy. Everyone in the office is real nice. So yeah, just ask to get it sent back and you can take care of that. Awesome. All right. We're going to get through the next tip, which is understanding when a greater than minimal risk study is eligible for an expedited continuing review. So this is one that came from one of our staff members, and basically there are 3 different conditions under which continuing review of a full board study can happen through an expedited mechanism. And I guess the categories for 8A and 8C are a little confusing for some folks. So you want to make sure that you have these specific items checked if you're trying to get expedited review for your continuing review under these particular conditions. If you have questions about this one, it's a little vague, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that there are certain sets of answers you have to check in order to be eligible for certain types of expedited review or continuing review. So things like if you're in data analysis only, if no one's been enrolled and the study hasn't changed since the initial review, or you're only doing long-term follow-up of participants. So those kind of things are why you'd have continuing review that would be expedited instead of go to full board. All right, moving on to tip number 6. You want to attach a study progress document for your continuing review. You want to provide specific summary information. So the specific summary information we'd love to get at continuing review is a document that describes the current state of subjects on the study. So a sort of an assessment of how many have been consented, how many have enrolled, which we think means completed any study procedures, how many are on treatment, how many have finished treatment, how many are in follow-up, how many were withdrawn by the PI or themselves chose to withdraw. And if there were any deviations or adverse events that didn't meet the threshold for submission of a PAR, we'd love for you to attach the deviation log and or adverse event log to the continuing review. And there is guidance again to follow on this. So the IRB review type continuing review talks a lot about what the IRB needs at continuing review. And just so you understand what the IRB does at continuing review, it has to look and see over the course of the study how the study has been conducted so far. Is there any new information that would change the initial determination and risk-benefit assessment of the study? You know, if there have been a lot of adverse event reports, is it really, does it really meet the risk profile that you thought, that the IRB thought it was initially? So that sort of thing. So these are really important things to give us the adverse event and the deviation log, as well as sort of a tallying of participants so far. Tip number 7, we have describe proposed changes and the justification or reasoning for those changes when you submit an amendment. So when you submit an amendment, you've got a summary piece of the application, and then you've got whatever parts of the study that you're modifying. So in the summary part, sort of the cover sheet to the amendment, it's really important that you don't just say new consent form, but like, why is there a new consent form? And sometimes in thinking through why a new consent form, you realize, oh, there's a new consent form because there's a new IB. So I should also check, like, you know, that I should also indicate that I'm submitting a new IB. And then it makes more sense because there's changes in the risks that needs to go in the consent form, and the IB gives us the information by which they determined there were these increased risks. You know, what other studies were looked at, were they relevant to this research, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure that you sort of talk through why this amendment whenever you submit it. And there's guidance here, guidance and procedures, IRB review type, amendments to previously approved research. So we have, let's see, and oh, the other thing about it is that if you submit updated investigator brochure, be sure to give us the clean and track changes version of the IB. I mentioned this earlier, but it bears repeating. And then in addition to the clean and track changes, the PI should provide an assessment of whether the new information should be provided to subjects, either with a revised consent form if you're still enrolling, or with a letter or notification if everyone's completed treatment and it's a late effect that has been seen. So really just think through how the impact this new information might have on current or previously enrolled subjects. All right, tip number 8. Just a few more to go. We want you to provide complete information for revised consents submitted via amendment. And what does this mean? We need the clean and we need the track changes versions, including the why. Why are you making these consent changes? And considering currently enrolled subjects. So whether the changes are because of a new IB or a new protocol, new procedures, you really want to sort of talk through these things in the summary for the amendment. Because if it's that there are new procedures, then there should be a corresponding updated protocol, or there should be a corresponding protocol clarification letter, or a new schedule of activities, or something to suggest why there would be these changes to the methods, changes to the procedures for subjects. So they know, I don't have to go to 10 visits, I only have to go to 9 now, or I now have to go to 11 instead of 10. All these things should be made clear in the amendment summary. Anita, I hope I can hear you this time.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me now? Yes? Okay, cool. Okay, following scenario. A study was approved, went to UCLA IRB, ICFs are done, all good is good and ready to go. Then we get notification from Central IRB that in addition to the existing 2 ICFs that already went to IRB, there are two new additional ICFs. So do I submit them via an amendment or just a study update?
So if I understand,
More, I can take that more.
Perfect, thank you.
Hi, this is
Okay.
Rebecca Floristella. So if it's two completely new consent forms, if I understood your question correctly,
Yes.
you would need to submit those as an amendment because they weren't previously reviewed and authorized for use at UCLA. So we would need to make sure that UCLA specific language is incorporated into those new two completely new consent forms. When you would use update study details when it's the consent that has been previously accepted by UCLA and there's changes to sections that don't impact UCLA language. So for example, you have a protocol amendment and they're changing the timing of the blood draws slightly. So they update the consent form and they do the protocol amendment. That doesn't impact anything at UCLA. There's no new blood draws. There's no new radiation language, so that you could use update study details. So you do an amendment if the UCLA has not reviewed a consent form ever before, or changing sections of the consent form that deal with UCLA specific language, and you would use the Reliance consent form checklist to determine what sections those are. It's going to be costs, radiation language, anything to do with the ancillary reviews.
Okay, good. So I already did it as a study update. I didn't realize. So do I cancel the study update and start with an amendment then over again?
If you're able to cancel the study update, if you've already submitted it, it might have already posted, but you should submit it as an amendment, or you can email the Reliance team offline and we can look at it together.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you for the question, Anita. So I'm sure that this is becoming more and more of an important question the more Reliance studies we have. So I appreciate you asking it for others to benefit from. All right, and here's the last tip in this cavalcade of tips. We want you to exercise caution when using the function of a CRAM, which is a continuing review and an amendment submitted as a single application to the IRB. And reasons you might not want to use a CRAM is that it can delay approval of an otherwise straightforward application. Let's say, for example, you have an amendment that is a substantive amendment, the protocol, consents are all being changed, and you have a continuing review. Let's say the continuing review is straightforward. Let's say let's say you've had one or two enrollments, but nothing dramatic has happened with the enrollees. Then the continuing review would probably be able to be approved rather quickly, right? But if you have a back and forth on the amendment part, the continuing review is going to have to wait for approval until the amendment is sorted out. And this means that you might be at risk for a lapse in approval. And we really don't want to have lapses in approval. So I'd recommend, if there's any possibility that either part of the CRAM might hold up the other part, just separate them out. If you've got an amendment, you have to change things, submit an amendment, and then submit a CRAM, or vice versa. Sorry, and then submit a CR, so that you can have them be reviewed separately. Sometimes amendments can be reviewed like that, and because they're expedited. And so that once the CR is approved, if you've already gotten the amendment approved, then you can start enrolling with a revised application that was approved at amendment earlier. So that's the sort of thing that you want to sort of really think through. In a perfect world, I can see why the people who designed the system created a CRAM, but in terms of actual IRB life, there's a number of back and forth sometimes with applications, so that makes it difficult to use. The other reason why you might not want to use a CRAM is if you have, if the AM part of a CRAM is changing study personnel, while that CRAM, either delayed by the CR or delayed by the AM, is going back and forth with the IRB requests, you will not be able to use the edit study personnel function. So if you have a change in staff, while a cram is in submission, you are kind of stuck. You could wait, you could put them in the AM and add new staff in the AM, but they wouldn't be able to do the work of the study until both the CR and the AM are approved. So again, these are reasons why you might not want to use a cram. I could not think of reasons why you would want to use a cram, so I actually strongly advise against using it. I know it exists for now, but just think through what could the worst case scenario. All right, and let's see. Are you able to add a comment box in Bruin IRB for the continuing review summary updates as it was previously provided in WebIRB? So Bruin IRB is a different system than WebIRB. It's about document uploads. A lot of studies there will be a study summary report, an annual report for the study that you could just upload. We don't have a box at continuing review for that. You're just going to have to put it into a Word document and upload it. So anything we do to add extra boxes and such is a customization, and we're trying to minimize customizing as much as possible because it adds a lot of mishigas to our IT team. So we aren't going to add that. We have no plans to do that now, but thank you for the note. I recommend just making a Word document and putting that in. Let's see. So we also discourage, thank you, Tanya. If you see her comment in the chat, we're discouraging use of the cram for study closures as well. That becomes really tricky because we can't, if we're approving both the AM and the CR at the same time, then what is the point of the AM when the study is closing at the exact time it's being approved? So if you think about it, an AM is, here's how we'd like to modify the study moving forward. And there is no moving forward with a study closure. So definitely do not use a cram for study closures. If there's some reason why you need to modify the study right before you close it, then just do an amendment first and then do a study closure. Although I can't really think of why you would do that. All right. So the next thing is, let's see, what should be submitted first, a CR or an AM? Well, it really is up to you. They can be reviewed through different mechanisms. I mentioned before, you might have an AM that can be reviewed as expedited, and the continuing review might need to go to full board. So if you submit them the same day, you might get the amendment approved first and then the CR. So it really is up to you. It doesn't change the process, like how speedily it can be reviewed. The content of the application, the AM or the CR, is what makes it possible to be reviewed faster or slower. So I don't know. It's up to you. Yeah. And let's see, anything else? No other.
This is Rebecca again. Sorry. I just wanted to add just some really good, a really good tip that someone brought up when developing this presentation was, if you get in your CR with plenty of time, so when you receive that 60-day notice, the review of the amendment shouldn't be impacted. So that gives, submitting them separately gives you plenty of time to get that amendment incorporated as part of your CR review. Excellent. Yeah, so a great example of that is if you're changing the enrollment goals in your AM, right? And that can get approved before the CR. Then when the CR is reviewed and the IRB sees that you've already enrolled the 100 subjects you initially said you were going to enroll, they won't question why you want to keep the study open to enrollment, because you already got the amendment to up it to 200 subjects with the justification. So yes, it makes everything move more smoothly. So possibly an AM first, who knows? So great. So those are the 9 tips that I collected from various sources for today's presentation. I also created a little diagram for your resources. How do you get help for your submission? And on the far left, we've got committee staff. They are, and I've linked to our staff directory. So you'll see in Bruin IRB, the staff assigned, their name will be in the header of your application. So you can go and look them up and get their phone number,
their email, give them a call, send them a message through Burn IRB, any of those things. And they're in the best position to answer questions about specific studies and correspondence from the IRB. So if you think about it, the staff in OHRPP are sort of the like communication facilitators between the IRB and the research team. So if the IRB sent correspondence that you don't quite understand, talk to the staff person because they can help paraphrase what the IRB is trying to get at if it's unclear to you. So don't just wring your hands and worry about it. Just pick up the phone, give us a call, because we can always improve our communication about this. Let's see. Oh, looks like we've got another comment. As part of the CR application, it asks for the total enrollment study-wide. I've recently had a sponsor say they are not sharing this information. Do we have any documents we could share with the sponsor to explain the necessity of this data? We do have what we call a sponsor letter, but I'm not sure it's included in the sponsor letter. So, what the IRB is trying to understand is, has the study enrolled all of the subjects it needed to answer its research question, right? So there's the ethical issue of we don't want additional people enrolled if the number of subjects who have already been enrolled are sufficient to answer your research question. So you could simply get a statement from the sponsor that the enrollment goal of 100 subjects at all sites has not yet been achieved. If you could get them to say something like that, then that would be sufficient if they aren't going to give us the specifics of it. Do I have a document showing which documents do not need approval and should not be submitted? Yes, it's the document about materials required for IRB review, the guidance and procedure. And there's a link to it in this presentation that will be sent out. Let's see. I understand people err on the side of submitting more, but as I was trying to explain before, that doesn't necessarily help speed through your IRB process. We really need you guys to think critically about, does this fall into the category of things the IRB asked for or not? And we can always, the IRB staff and OHRPP can always ask you for more things if you didn't give us everything we needed. But again, there are documents for the sponsor, there's documents for the FDA, and there's documents for the IRB. And there's a Venn diagram with a lot of overlap, but these are not the same set of documents. We all have different tasks we need to complete. Let's see, another question that came up. In the event we don't hear back from the IRB owner, who can we email to check the IRB review's progress? Great question. So all of our committees, all of our IRB committees are organized into teams. There's the administrator, usually a senior analyst and an analyst. So if you reach out to the senior analyst or an analyst and you don't hear back from them, maybe they're on leave, we don't know, we don't have out of office for the Bruin IRB system, you should definitely reach out to the administrator and say, hi, I haven't heard back, what's going on with this? So yes, the administrator, and you can find them on the committee staff. They're also listed there. Perfect, all right. So then we have our procedure and guidance documents. Oh, great. Anya is providing a little more information in the chat about page 3 of the letter to sponsors, which is available on our homepage. If you scroll down to the bottom, there's a letter that you can send to sponsors which explains how we do things at UCLA. And on page 3 of it, it says what specific documents we don't need as part of the review. So that can be something you can provide them to justify why you are not submitting things like the ID cards for clinical trial participants. All right, so we have a question for if FDA or DSMB letters need submission. It depends. So for instance, if the IRB says you have to go to the FDA and get an IDE for a device study, and this researcher goes to the FDA and applies for an IDE, and the FDA says, we're not going to give you one. That would be a good letter to upload to explain why you are not providing an IDE number to the IRB, right? But only in sort of like those kind of situations where the IRB asks you to go to the FDA and the FDA says, like that's a good FDA document to upload. But otherwise, it would be the investigator's brochure and the protocol. Those are the things that we need for review. And DSMB letters, some need to be submitted and some do not. And all of that is listed in the PAR guidance, which is in our procedures and guidance documents, which is this diagram of information.
Yes, thank you, Maura. I think that the PAR guidance is a great resource for people to answer that question because, again, a clinical hold or something communicated from the FDA should be submitted, but it's going to be the type of communication that the DSMB or the FDA provide. And again, if those create changes or if there is some safety information or something that for the board to evaluate. But like there might be certain types of letters where no, they don't need to be submitted. Again, I would use the guidance and the posted guidance. So a great tool, more good suggestion.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. So all of this is saying, please go to our guidance documents. We put a lot of work and energy into them to figure out like what is it that you need to know for your submissions. So always good to check there. We also have in our Bruin IRB resource library a couple of really important documents and information. So we have the protocol templates and supplements. So these are when you're submitting to the IRB through Bruin IRB, it is a protocol upload process. And if you don't have a protocol already, our protocol is basically all of the things that the IRB would need to know about your study in order to review it. Supplements are for specific cases. You're enrolling children, you are asking for a waiver or something that you can then explain and justify, like using kids in the study, how they're being used, or why you need a waiver, for example. In addition, the Bruin IRB Resource Library contains quick guides, which are quick and dirty, screenshot embedded how-tos in using our Bruin IRB system. So those are great resources if you're like, how do I open an amendment? How do I do X? How do I do Y? How does my PI do an annual assurance? So all of that stuff is in quick guides. Then we've got our YouTube channel, which is very exciting. So we put all of our videos that from our Learn at Lunches and also some shorter training videos that we put together. Great, Tiffany put a link to it in the chat. So you would maybe subscribe to our channel since it'll have information you need to know. And if you miss sessions, you can always go and look at the recorded Learn at Lunch. Lastly, Bruin IRB at research.ucla.edu. Again, these are to answer questions about the system, provide technical support when Bruin IRB won't let you do what it's supposed to do. And also to direct you if you need to be directed to resources to use Bruin IRB. So hopefully all of these resources will be helpful to you in successfully submitting a concise, accurate, and up-to-date application. Thank you so much for participating. If you have any other, let's see. Oh, here we go. I have some more questions in the chat. If we rely on a central IRB, do we need to submit all protocol changes to Bruin IRB? Shall we go back to Rebecca?
Yes, I was just typing a response to that. But just to repeat again, we would only review ICF updates that impact UCLA template language or required ancillary reviews. So if there's new radiation procedures and you need to get radiation risk language reviewed and approved, then we would need to review it. Otherwise, you can use update study details.
Yeah, if you just want to think about conceptually, the Reliance application is really just letting us know and have like final sign off on just the UCLA specific parts of the consent forms, but you don't update the protocol with us every time there's a protocol update with the central IRB. It's really just a very light application. And same thing with PARs. We've gotten a bunch of PARs lately that have been an adverse event that really needs to go to the central IRB. They need to adjudicate the impact of that adverse event. And if they say that it's serious or it is an unanticipated problem involving risk of subjects, it's serious noncompliance, if it's continuing noncompliance, they'll make a determination of that. Then you submit to the UCLA IRB through Berlin IRB to let us know that that determination was made, because we have local stakeholders who need to be aware of those IRB determinations. But really, otherwise, you wouldn't submit to us when events happen, you would submit to the central IRB. So,
Well, I have one more question.
sure.
Okay. So, the clinical trial, it's ongoing, things are going well. Then there is a protocol update. And I read the protocol update summary of changes. And the only thing that I saw that could possibly impact, the budget or money or invoicing, right, something we could charge for, is they added that the patient's respiratory rate has to be taken as part of the vital signs. That was the only new thing that I saw clinical.
Is this central IRB?
No, this was in the summary of changes for the protocol update.
I see. So they added taking vitals.
No, we have to take vitals, but they added as part of taking the vitals, you must also take the patient's respiratory rate. I guess count how many times they breathe in and breathe out in 1 minute, something like that.
So it really depends on how specific you were in the consent form. If you said, we'll take your vitals, and you didn't specify, we'll take your pulse, we'll take your blood pressure, we'll take your temperature. Like if you just said vital signs in the consent form, it doesn't really need to be updated, because it's not something that'll change the risk. It's not inaccurate. It's part of vital signs.
But to that point, if this is being submitted to the UCLA IRB, not necessarily to the central IRB, we would expect in your assessment of how you're implementing those changes for you to explain that in detail, that great, this update involves this respiratory, whatever, this additional item that we're taking. We're not updating the consent form because we feel that it's already adequately described within the description of the vitals, right? So there needs to be a through line of what the proposed changes are and what those impacts are and how the UCLA PI and their study team are implementing those, right? And that needs to be well documented and conveyed. Otherwise, there's confusion and things that aren't necessarily documented. It's not clear if it was not thought through or what the thought process was for that, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, I was more concerned about the financial implications. Taking vital signs generally, when a nurse or somebody takes a patient's vital, right? There's a charge associated with that, right? PI takes the vitals, or whoever, the sub-I takes the vitals, right? By adding also taking the respiratory date, is that a actual financial implication? Would that actually add cost?
I would say that that's not really an IRB issue. That would probably be something that you would want to negotiate, like deal with coverage analysis, right? I doubt in the scenario that that's something that's being transferred to the subject. If that were the case, you would need to, again, let us know so that we could evaluate the cost to the subjects. However, I think your question is not really IRB related, but more related for other offices within clinical.
Yes. Now that you say coverage analysis, are probably the better.
Exactly right. Like I think there's other billing and other people. I actually has a huge impact on any of the information about how subjects are, what the costs to them are actually going to be, or that would be outside of what we would already have described. But again, that may raise other issues that are non-IRB related, right?
Right. Okay, perfect. No, that's a good point. I'll check with them, and then we'll go from there. Second question: IRB closures. Generally, when the anniversary date nears, right, the IRB sends an automated message to us, like, "Hey," right? We get something automated when something is coming close to its anniversary date or closure date, right?
You get a courtesy reminder.
Yeah. How soon do we get that courtesy reminder?
Tanya, do you know, was it 60 and then 30 days and then the day the study expires?
It is 90, 60, and 30 days. And then at closure.
Okay. So you get a lot when the study's going to close or when the study is going to expire.
If you aren't receiving those notifications for some reason, it could mean that you're not listed as primary contact. Or we have seen there's quite a bit of email. There are differences in emails. So if you aren't seeing those, we can look up what email is on file. There's also a way to change that if you prefer to get your email somewhere else. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, that's a good point.
It's a great.
Because
Around the time that we switched over to Bruin IRB, there was also a change in what system we pulled profile information for Bruin IRB and Web IRB. And that was an institutional choice that it was now pulling from UC Path instead of from HR. So what that means is that if you have a very old email that doesn't work anymore in your UC Path and you haven't updated in UC Path, that might be why you're not getting the right information. I think someone who had been at UCSF and is now at UCLA, their emails were going into like the stratosphere at UCSF. So definitely look and see on your profile in Bruin IRB what email is listed for you, and it might be because of the UC Path that might need to be updated.
right. One more question. I'm sorry. Can I ask one more? Are we at the top of the hour? No, not yet, right? Okay. Study closures. Okay. So generally, let's say a study, it's nearing its anniversary or its end date in IRB, and the study is closing. All patients have been enrolled. No new patients will be enrolled. It's all going according to the timeline. But oftentimes, the finances of a study will still linger, right? We'll still have to submit the final invoice, make sure the sponsor gives us the final payment and all that good stuff, which tends to take, 30, 60 days after a study, closes out. For the IRB, what do I do with I leave it open, I put in a notice like, hey, don't close it yet, we're still working on wrapping this thing up, or how's that work?
Hi. So this, if you've had the final closeout study visit with the sponsor, and again, there's different types of research where there's various, funding agencies. However, I think you're probably talking about, industry-sponsored clinical trials here is what this really sounds like. If you've had the final closeout visit, you're able to submit the closure notice. The rectifying the budget and all of those other activities that might be happening after the fact aren't human subjects research activity and don't require active IRB review and approval. So there is not necessarily a need to have studies be open. And we've had some sponsors recently who've been asking the study teams to close them out repeatedly while there might be some contract issues and other things happening. So if you've had the study closeout visit and they've said that it's okay to submit to the IRB to close the study, that is the human subjects research portion of that would be able to be closed. And we can discuss specific details if you have, in specific instances that comes up or something.
Okay, but if you're still working on the finances, leave it open. Don't submit the closure.
I mean, the finances aren't human subjects research. So if the sponsor has done a closeout visit, they've done the monitoring, they're not accessing identifiable information for human subjects research purposes, you're likely able to close. We can discuss a specific instance as it comes up if you would like. But in general, the finance is not human subjects research and does not require IRB review. We have no purview over that. We have no authority over that. If that makes any sense?
Yeah. But just for your information, I'm sure you know it, but the finance people always tell me, don't close it, Hamida. We're still working on the finances.
And you're more than welcome to forward those to our office if you need to have confirmation about closing out. But again, the IRB does not oversee the finance aspects of that.
Right,
and most likely that does not require IRB review and approval.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Mark is right. There are very limited things about money that the IRB are interested in. Like, we are interested in the funding source, like who is funding the research. And we're interested if you're paying participants, but beyond that, it's really not in our scope. So closure and reconciling is not on us. Any other questions in the few minutes we have left? Really appreciate all of your questions because they tell us, where we need to work more on spreading information. So thank you. All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Everyone who registered, whether or not they showed up, will get a copy of the slides, and we're going to post to our YouTube channel, and etc. So thank you all, and have a great day.